Today is September 6th, 2013. My name is Teresa Larson. I am talking with Mary Watkins, who's on the left, and Alice McNertney, who's on the right. They are now retired, but they were longtime staff members at McFarland Clinic in Ames, and that's what we're going to talk about today. First of all, Mary, can you tell me where you went to college and what kind of degree that you got?
Well, I went to Iowa State College. I graduated in '43, but I didn't have any work that resulted in my job. I had been asked by a couple of doctors whom I knew, Dr. Baird and Dr. Bliss and some of the oldies, that they knew that I was putting my son through college. He was just graduating from high school, and I decided to, in college, was a little more than I could handle.
So what year did you start at McFarland Clinic?
I started probably about 62.
Okay.
Somewhere in that area, yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't have any title or any designated work assigned to me. I just sort of roamed around into the different departments and worked where somebody was needed.
Okay, we'll follow that up in a little bit. Alice, tell me about your medical school training, where it was and when.
I went to Mercy Hospital School of Nursing in Des Moines, and I graduated there in 1959. And we also took our classes at Drake University. Then we came to Ames, and that's where we settled down and stayed here.
How did you get a job here in Ames?
Well, we just went to the hospital and said we want a job. And they said, okay. So
there were openings.
Actually 4 of us came. And all 4 of us went to work at Mary Greeley.
How did you get to McFarland?
Well, I happened to work on the floor that one end was the pediatric department. And Dr. Hildebrand came in there quite frequently. And he was so nice to me, and we had some nice conversation, and I worked nights. And so I went home one day, and the phone rang right after I got home, and I was thinking, why, who's calling me at this time? I'm sleeping, you know. And it's Dr. Hildebrand, and he said, you want a job? And I said, who am I talking to? He said, Dr. Hildebrand. I just talked to you at the hospital. I just wondered if you'd be interested in working in an office. And of course, I was. So he said, well, I suppose you're sleeping now. And I said, yes, I was sleeping. He said, how about 3 o'clock this afternoon? So I said, okay. Went 3 o'clock the afternoon, and we talked, and he said, you're hired. How long do you have to stay over at Mary Greeley before you can leave? And so I said, well, I imagine 2 weeks. I didn't know. I never had a job before, you know. So anyway, he said, well, let me know when you can come. And so I just went and resigned from Mary Greeley, and I had to give my 2 weeks notice, of course.
Mm-hmm. So you both started roughly the same time?
No, yeah.
Yes, it would have
Yes.
been.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you know each other when you...
No.
Well, we knew each other after we got to the clinic.
After you got to the clinic, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we'll talk about that.
You can't help but know each other at McFarland Clinic.
Tell me more about that. What do you mean?
Pardon me?
What do you mean you can't help but know each other at McFarland Clinic?
Well, it was a small building, you know, so everybody was, truly a family. It was truly a family. And the doctors had coffee down in the basement, and the rest of us could have coffee at the doctors at one end, the nurses at the other end, you know. It was no big deal, you know. Just we were down in a room in the basement that they stored magazines in, I think, or newspapers.
And they did have some patients' records, remember?
Well, it sounds like there was a very comfortable relationship between the doctors and the nurses and the business staff.
Well, yeah, you had to, because it was probably no bigger than this room, was it? It was, you pretty much knew what was going on every place. It was a small enough building. I don't think there were more than 12 doctors in there, was there?
No, there were 15, I think, when we moved up to the new building.
Okay. Yeah.
But while we were starting, we moved up in '63, was that right? Well,
yes,
anyway,
yes.
yeah.
It was the year after we came back.
Joining us is Georgia Bluhm, who's also a longtime staff member, now retired at McFarland Clinic. And Georgia will just kind of pick up the story here. Mary was talking about some of the things that she did to kind of fill in, so to speak. Can you go ahead and, so you were at the receptionist desk, you said, Mary?
Yes, and then there were other desks around the building, and if they needed help there, why, I was sort of the gopher, and I had no training in the business side, and I didn't have an office. I remember had a corner of Burl Houck's desk. That was my home base. And so it was very interesting. I got to meet a lot of people that way.
You said you didn't have any medical training, but I bet you learned something about medicine hanging around there.
Oh yes, I did, and I enjoyed that. But I didn't have the business training either. I was in home economics at the college.
Mm-hmm. So, Georgia, both Mary and Alice have described their training, so I'll give you an opportunity to say where you went to school and how you got your medical training.
Well, I went to the University of Iowa, the College of Nursing there, and my parents always thought I would go to a nursing school like Des Moines or somewhere like that, and I had this person come to our high school and talked all about the university and how wonderful it would be, so I went home and told my dad that that's where I wanted to go, and he sort of gulped and said, okay, I think we can manage that. And so anyway, that's how I ended up down there, and I really didn't know any more about it than what the lady told us when she came to our career day, so that's where I went to school down there.
And then how did you get to Ames and McFarland Clinic?
Then after I graduated, I got married to a high school sweetheart from Charles City, and we were in the Army well, he was in for 2 years, I was in for a year in Huntsville, Alabama, and so then he got a job back here at Iowa State, and he'd gone to Iowa State to school and kind of wanted to go on for more education, so we came back here, and
Can you give me a rough year when that was?
1960.
Oh. So you all were kind of here, came just kind of at the same
Yeah.
at the same time. So one of the questions that I would ask the other ladies, Georgia, was if there was ever something that surprised you at McFarland Clinic when you got your first job, or were you just so prepared you just walked right in and everything was perfect?
Not prepared at all. And I worked nights, so it was just me and the telephone operator, and I've been trying to think of her name, but I can't remember anymore. Do you remember?
Romans.
Nancy.
Well,
Romans.
Nancy, but
Romans.
this was the one that worked more at night. Nancy was in the daytime, wasn't
Yeah, Nancy was daytime.
she? And the one that worked at
I
night,
can't remember a night operator. There was a woman that answered the phone after the clinic closed.
yeah, that was Helen.
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 Oh, that's pretty good.
So you were there at night.
I was there at night, and it was kind of spooky, but at least there were, and the janitor was there, so there were 3 of us at least. And so we would get people like would now normally go to the emergency room, but we got those people at the clinic, so we did lacerations and saw sick kids and all that kind of stuff, and the appropriate doctor would be called in to come and take care of these people. So yeah, it's pretty exciting some of the time. Yeah, I wasn't really prepared either, I don't think. I went in and talked to Mary and Burl in their combined office and to see about a job. And I don't know, they just asked me my name and where I'd gone to school, and I can remember Burl saying, well, that's all we need to know, isn't it, Mary? And so there I was, so that was pretty easy.
So, Mary, you helped hire Georgia.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yep. So
I met a number of young ladies that I can't really remember the interview.
yeah, I'm sure you can, but
But I'll bet you learned quickly.
I hope. I don't know. We did surgery things and kid things and adult medicine and did anybody tell about Florence being? She was kind of my.
Oh no, I don't think we mentioned
She kind of
Florence.
set me straight when I came to work the first day. They sent me back to. She was kind of over the our little emergency room type thing or surgery room, and so I walked in and she was there and she was very precise and she said, "Now you young girls just out of nursing school, you just don't do things like you should. You aren't as proper as you should be, and I'm going to tell you how things are going to be, and this is how I want them to be." And I'm going, okay. So
You did that well, Dad.
Can you tell me who this person was? This was supervisor of nursing, or who was this person?
She was Dr.
She
Ernie,
is
Dr.
seniority, I
McFarland,
think.
one of the old, first guys that started the business. It was his nurse. Wasn't
Mhm.
she?
yeah,
She
There's
was.
Julie.
Dr. Ernie's nurse.
No, not
Yeah.
Ernie's. It was even before
Oh,
Dr.
before
Ernie. Yeah.
the dad.
I really don't remember much about her prior work, but
Dr.
she-
G.E. McFarland Sr., would that be
Yeah.
who it
Yeah,
was?
probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she was quite firm.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Really. But yeah, everything.
Alice, did you experience her?
Oh yes. Oh yes. You couldn't help but know her.
And she was never married, so I think the clinic was her life.
It was, yeah. She went from being their nurses, and then she went to when she went up to the big clinic, the newer.
Yes.
She did. What did they call it? Central
supply
Supply.
room.
Central Supply,
Yeah,
she was
she-
in charge of that. She would be really good at that because she was very fussy.
Precise.
Very
Yes.
fussy about everything.
Yeah. Yeah, she still thought we were just bimbos, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Now Alice was there when I came, so
Not long.
not long. But were you at the front desk when? Did you ever work at the front desk?
No.
Who was there when I came?
Betty.
Is this person memorable? Yeah?
Betty.
Betty. Wasn't there she was Betty. Betty. She was a Betty, I know that.
Well, that's how I learned what to do at the front desk and stuff. Since I was there at night, I had to learn whatever I could during that maybe week or something during the daytime, and then I was on my own after that. So that was interesting, yeah.
So I wasn't aware that you had sort of some administrative responsibilities, Georgia, as well as nursing. I mean, you had to do everything at night,
Yeah, we
except
did
maybe sweep the
everything.
floor because there was a janitor there.
We did everything. I was trying to think the other day what we did about payments at night. I don't remember handling any money or anything. Did we just send out bills? People didn't give us money.
Well, I don't know, they got it, they got the charge card,
Yeah.
I think, after the doctor saw them. But I don't remember, where was the,
There was
Treasure.
a little by the where the pharmacy was?
uh-huh.
Yeah.
In there. Well, there, just beside it was this little cubby hole. I think that's where you and Burl were, weren't you?
Well,
Or were you back further?
we're back further.
Oh, you're
Yeah,
back.
back in the hall. Yeah.
So I don't remember about like at night, when we got people in at night, how they paid, and they didn't pay much either then, but,
Could we talk about payment? Let's say when you all started your nursing career at McFarland Clinic, let's start with a well child visit for Dr. Hildebrand. How much would that have cost?
I don't have any idea.
You have no idea.
No, I don't know how much they were charging at that
Yeah.
time.
You know?
and the
Okay,
doctors marked the charge or
Yeah.
whatever we had,
Yeah,
so.
they marked down what they wanted to
Yeah,
give.
so I
Mhm.
So I couldn't tell you that.
Could you tell me?
Maxine might know. Maxine might know.
Spurgeon.
No, Maxine Hildebrand.
Oh, Maxine. Yes, she might know. She lives upstairs,
Oh,
doesn't she?
okay.
Yeah.
So, can you tell me what you were paid as staff members when you first started? Do you remember that at all?
I do remember how much I started to work there, and they told me it would be $275 a month.
And what did you think of that?
Well, I thought
probably
I was getting, I'm going to be a millionaire before long, you know. Because I remember I was a student for 3 years. I had no money. We saved pennies to go down to Babe's restaurant in Des Moines for pizza and milk.
Yeah.
Pizza and milk.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's $275 a month.
Wow. How about you, Georgia? Do you
Yeah.
remember?
I don't remember the monthly thing. I was thinking that I got about $1.67 or something an hour to start with. So I don't know what that comes out to.
Well, you divide.
But then I didn't work 40 hours either
Mhm.
a week.
No,
I
that's
worked
right.
part-time.
I don't even know how much. I just knew that I was going to get $265. So I was just going to be rich.
Mary, do you remember at all what
Oh,
your
no,
salary
I
was?
really
Okay.
don't.
Okay.
That's terrible, but I don't have a clue.
And so you had mentioned payment. Did people pay for their appointments right then, or were there fancy ways of charging it? Do you remember?
Well, as I remember those little charge cards, the amount was on that card. Now, who put it there, I don't know.
I think that
I
the
think the
doctors put
doctors
it on
marked
there.
it.
You know, there was no, right now, you know, all you have to do is make a check mark on a number, by a number, and that's what they charge. Well, now, I think back in those days that I remember, when I would take the charge cards off of the chart, Hildy had already put the price on it, you know, what he was charging.
Mhm.
I couldn't tell you what it was,
Was.
but
Do you know if the doctors had some latitude that they might know whether somebody was capable of paying or not paying?
oh yes, I
Mhm.
definitely think
Oh,
they were.
Yeah, they had a pretty good feel for
Yeah,
that.
they
Yeah.
did.
So that was a way of having a sliding scale. They knew if there was somebody that didn't have the means, that might be a different charge.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that went on a lot.
Even when
and-
we moved to the
They'd bring
new
in
clinic,
some
they did that.
eggs or something.
Yeah,
I remember.
I think they did that too.
I'm sorry, Mary, you said somebody brought what?
Oh, some eggs. I remember Ernie came into our office. Now, this is when we were in the new building. And he had some eggs somebody had brought in. And he wanted credit given to that patient.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Because he didn't have the money, but he had the chickens.
I remember at the little clinic downtown, Ernie, I think it was Ernie, Dr. Ernie came up to the desk, or to the business office or whatever, and he said, "Get this lady money for her husband to pay his tuition to school." Yeah, he did, and she was crying in the back room, and that was she was. I don't know where she worked, but she worked there, and he he just went back out there and said, just write her a check for her husband's tuition. And they did. You know, those are some of the things that happened back then. They were just, my experience with Dr. Ernie was when I was a student in nurses training, I had a month off in the summertime. And so I wanted to work in a hospital. So I went to Story City to the hospital up there. And I had just gotten out of a surgical department. And so I said I wanted to work in the surgery. So they said, oh, they were just so happy to see me. But the little gal says, oh, Dr. Ernie, he yells at you. And I said, oh, okay. So he was all but nice to me. So I thought he wanted to know, well, where'd you go to school? And I said, well, I'm a student at Mercy Hospital. He looked at me and said, a student? And I thought, okay. But we got along just fine. He wanted to make sure that he could feel the instrument in his hand, you know, when you passed the instrument to him. So I made sure he felt it.
And hear it.
Yes, I had to do that, you know. And I'm sure that when we got all done, he left and went in to change his clothes. And he came back out and he said, when will you graduate? And I told him, and he said, you call me up, I'll get you a job. So
sounded like
that's the kind of things that we worked with.
Mm-hmm. It sounds really very family
Family-oriented.
Yeah.
family, that you really were a family. That there was
We
just
really were.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, in all families, there are some people who are cut-ups. What are there funny moments that you can think of within that small family on working in that situation on 6th Street?
I think of Dr. Hildebrand when I think of funny.
I do just
You never know what he's going to,
You know,
to say.
or to say.
I remember him talking to a parent one night, and he was out at the desk where I was, like the front desk, and he said they were wondering, they had a sick child and what to do, and he said to bring them in. And he said, no, we don't make house calls. And apparently the parent said something, you know, and he said, well, bring him in the car. What do you drive, man? A lumber truck or something? Like, can't you turn it was winter, can't you turn the heater on, you know? Oh my gosh, he could always get away with that stuff, you know.
He loved children,
Oh, he did.
but he didn't tolerate parents
He
very
didn't.
well.
And he would say, if the dad would bring the child in, and then he'd start asking questions, well, you know, did the child do so-and-so during the daytime? And of course the dad never knew because he wasn't home with it. And he'd say, why did you bring this child in? Where is the mother? I need to talk to somebody that knows something about the child in the daytime. Oh my gosh.
so he loved his kids.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. And they came first.
Mhm.
Parents, he could have nothing to do with them.
Nothing but trouble for him.
Oh.
So I was just going to ask you what doctors you worked for, and that kind of leads into that. Mary, everybody, because Mary was going around.
She was everybody's.
Yeah.
Well, Burl Houck was the director and manager. I don't know what his title was. I'll have to think about that. But he was my mentor, and he got me through all the departments
Mhm.
that I eventually had to know about.
And it sounds like you helped out even with, you know, the hiring, and you were
Yes,
kind of
I
an
did a
administrative
lot of
assistant
interviewing.
everywhere. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And personnel,
Mhm.
which is now human resources.
Yes, right.
Mary, can you ever remember talking to a candidate that you didn't hire, that you did not hire? Can you ever remember any interviews? And there
Yes.
might, okay.
Yes, I can remember some people that I didn't think were really interested in our type of medicine. Or they weren't able to keep the hours that we needed, and there were different reasons.
And when you say hours that were needed, you mean because there were some fairly long hours that people had to work?
Yes, well, as we said, we used to be opened in the evening and Saturday morning and Sunday morning. And so they just had to be able to be flexible.
What about your work hours and the doctors that you worked with, Alice?
Well, I started out with Dr. Hildebrand, and I worked about 18 months for Dr. Hildebrand, and then I got married. That did not go over well with Dr. Hildebrand because he checked me out when we first interviewed me. He wanted to know if I had a boyfriend or if I was engaged or those things. But anyway, he always made a. I think he was kind of serious about that. But anyway, so then I left town with my husband, and then we came back to about 2.5 years later. Came back to Ames. My husband got a teaching job here, and I decided to go back to the clinic. And I worked nights with Georgia. I think we were part-time down there.
Yeah.
So, and then I just, until my children got to school, and then I worked for Dr. Bliss for 4 years, and then we moved away again because my husband went back to school again. And then when I came back that time, I just went part-time. And I was just on call. Well, not for long, though. It was, I don't know how much longer I was there, but then I went to work for Dr. Dry. He was a internal medicine doctor, and I worked for him for 15 years.
You had mentioned Dr. Bliss.
Huh?
I didn't remember his being there that long.
15 years. Yeah.
So you mentioned Dr. Bliss. I mean, he's a well-known, he was not one of the founders, but he's a well-known doctor.
Yes, he was a wonderful doctor, wonderful to work for. And he offered me back the job when I was coming back from our spent Bill going to school, and he wanted me to come back to work for him, and I was real excited because I loved working with him, and so I told my husband that Dr. Bliss had sent me a letter and had said that, so-and-so, I couldn't remember who his nurse was going to be leaving, and would I be interested in taking the job back? And he said, yes. Bill told me, that's fine, yeah, if you want to go to work for him. He said, you can just make sure you pack your bags because you can might as well go live with him but he was on call 24/7. Whenever anybody called, if another doctor called from around in the smaller towns, they always called Dr. Bliss. At that time, they didn't have doctors on call. And even if there were doctors on call, Dr. Bliss, if they called him special, he would go in.
And so when he was called in, does that mean you would go too?
Not always, but
Okay.
if it was going to end up being in a surgery, then I would be called in too. So it was, I was going a lot. Yeah, so.
But exciting. What an exciting life.
Well, it was, yes. But then my husband went away to school again, but I didn't go with him that time. Babe was only gone for 8 weeks, so we managed to get through that.
And so, Georgia, you didn't stay working nights all the time.
I worked nights the whole time we were downtown, and then when we moved to the new clinic, I worked nights still and also on Sunday morning. And then, I don't know why, all of a sudden I wanted to work daytimes, and so I started working at the surgery desk, and then whenever we'd get a new doctor in or somebody was sick, I would go work for that new doctor for about 2 weeks or till they learned the telephones and the record system and all that stuff, and then they would probably hire a person, and then I'd go back to surgery, and then I'd work for people that were sick. And so I don't even know how long that went on. And then, actually, Alice and I worked part-time for Dr. Grant Sr.
Mm-hmm.
because they decided they needed a walk-in doctor there, which they'd never had before. And so he had retired from the university, student health. And so they talked him into coming and working after his retirement. And it was going to be for 2 years. And so Alice and I worked together.
I forgot about that.
I
Yes.
thought you did. So we did that, but it was in the surgery department. We just had one room and an exam room or something there. And so we did that. And when the 2 years was up, he went to administration or whoever and said, my 2 years is up. And they said, oh, already. And so they talked him into another year. So we did that for another year. And I don't know, Alice, if you were, or was it somebody else then? Had you moved on by then? I can't remember. But anyway, I did it
think
for
I was-
another year.
I think you and I did him
The
till
whole
he-
time.
I
Until
think
he,
so. I don't know.
then
for
finally
sure.
he said, okay, but that's going to be the end of it. So then after that, I was kind of back at the surgery desk for a while. But then Dr. Sproul's nurse, Becky Jules, was pregnant and she didn't really want to work full time. And so somehow we just connected, and I always had loved working with Dr. Sproul because he did a lot of minor surgery stuff, which I really liked. And so she just went and asked him, and he said, oh yeah, that'd be great. And because I had worked during my nighttime work, when he was on call, I would work with him, so I knew, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we started, and that lasted for 15 years. Becky and I worked part-time for 15 years together, and it worked out really great, and we could fill in for each other. We didn't even have to, you know, bother anybody else about it usually.
You hardly even had to worry about taking vacation or anything
Yeah,
like that
because-
because you could just cover for each
Yeah.
other. Yeah.
And so, and Dr. Sproul said one time, oh, I don't always know who's going to be here, but that's okay. He said, probably I wouldn't even have to come in. The girls are here, so I don't have to even come in. So the three of us really got along well for all those 15 years. It was great, and he was so easy to work for too, wasn't he? He was so
Yeah, he
easygoing.
was.
Gosh. So, and after that, when he retired, then I worked for Dr. Siren, who was the new dermatologist that came in. And then finally, I decided to retire myself. So,
It's probably hard for women such as yourselves who are leading these active, really important careers. It's probably hard to retire.
yeah, it is kind of.
I didn't find it too hard.
You were ready.
Well, actually, the last 10 years of my life at McFarland Clinic, I was what they call the PRN nurse. If somebody was gone, I went in and worked for him.
Mhm.
So I worked for just whoever it was.
Mhm.
And before I retired.
Mhm.
Then I decided, some of my friends who were already retired were taking the day to go to Des Moines shopping, or they were going to go here and they were going to go there. And I said, well, can't you wait till I get off work, you know? And well, no, we're going to. So I thought, I'm going to just retire then. So, but
Well, back to medicine for just a second. All of you have been at McFarland, the old building and the new building, for a long time period. Talk to me about any health crises or things that happened at Ames as far as health that you remember, like epidemics or some big event where there were lots of injuries. So what about some of those sorts of events?
this happened
Oh, I remember
not in
that.
Mary Greeley, but it happened to our physicians, and Dr. Bliss was in this. And a young man got caught in a grain bin accident.
And were you then?
No,
you're-
I was not working with
Okay.
Dr. Bliss at that time.
hmm And when was that, Alice? Can you hold that up just a little bit so I can see that? Amputate Iwan's leg in grain pit. Oh my
Yes.
gosh.
I remember that.
Yeah.
He was called out during the day.
Yes, it was during the day. Yeah.
on pins and needles.
I think it was 94. It's got this question mark, 1974. So that must have been when it was.
So were you working for Dr. Bliss then?
No,
no,
I
you
was
weren't.
not.
But you remember that incident.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do remember this incident.
And then they came to McFarland and then to Mary Greeley?
Oh, pardon?
They came to McFarland and then to Mary Greeley? Is that how the treatment worked? Or did they end up just directly at the hospital?
Probably went right. Well, see, they did the surgery, flashlight
in the
surgery.
grain bin.
In the grain bin. Oh my
With
goodness.
the flashlight. With
Oh,
flashlights.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
But that
Oh
was
my
one of the most
goodness.
memorable things. Of course, the whole clinic was zipping around because Dr. Bliss had.
Do you remember any? Well, by the 1960s, most of the disease epidemics were pretty much under control with shots, weren't they? I mean, do you remember? Let's see, any polio? The polio shots would have happened before you probably
yes.
started your.
Yeah, I don't remember.
You remember that?
Yeah.
It was not an issue.
It was not an issue.
But it wasn't too much long before that time, because when I was in school in Iowa City, we had all the people that were in iron lungs. And see, that was just in 55, 56.
Mm-hmm.
And then we started doing the drops for kids, where they put them on sugar cubes, and there were all
Yeah.
kinds of ways. But then, then came HIV, which we hadn't learned about at all, and had to,
How did that affect you in your practice?
well, yeah, it really affected us as far as gloving up for everything that we did, and I can just about remember the first person that came in that Dr. Sproul realized had HIV, and we were going to do some minor surgery or something, something we were doing. Anyway, he looked at me and he went like this, like, be sure you have your gloves on. Because he knew before we even did this that that's what we were into. And I didn't have a clue. I don't know how he knew. He just knew that this was going to be something, So,
And once again, you couldn't have trained for that. That wasn't something that you
wasn't
would.
something-
No, that was.
no.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you ever remember anything like that, Alice? You're
No.
having any other? I'm thinking about when the city hall was bombed. Do you
Oh,
remember
yes.
that?
Oh, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I
I
don't
was
know.
not working that day.
You were not working, or you were?
And I couldn't figure out what the sound was. Because I don't live that far. from-
Booming sound.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I didn't know if there were any other events in Ames or that you would remember that would have been of a health nature that you would be memorable. Anything else?
I can't think of anything major.
Yeah. Didn't have any plane crashes.
Is
or
there?
big car wrecks or anything?
No, I don't remember anything like that. And I don't think that any of my newspapers said much of that.
Well, let's return to the small building on 6th Street for just
Okay.
a second and the camaraderie that you all had there. The building was probably close quarters, and so you'd probably see each other in the hallways, unless you were like Georgia and you worked nights and you didn't see
Yeah.
as many people.
Didn't see people.
How many patients did you see? I mean, how big of an operation was it? In a day, what was the activity like?
Well, we had probably anywhere from 10 to 15 doctors at that time.
I think there was just 12 when I started to work there.
12.
There was
And you started in 1959? 9, okay.
No. I think it was 19. I think it was 1959.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
okay, so about 12 doctors,
Mhm.
roughly 1960-ish, okay. And so how many patients would they see a day, do you think?
Is it like every 15 minutes or something?
Yeah.
usually?
Well, they're a little longer than they do now.
Yeah.
Well, they just come in and look at what's written on the nurses and
That's
stuff,
right.
and then they say, okay.
That's right.
What do you mean by that, Alice?
But they don't take as much time now as
Mhm.
they did back then. Sometimes you'd think, are they ever coming out of there?
And some
He
of
was a
them,
busy person. He saw many, many more than other people did.
I think so too.
Yeah. I had, I always got a chuckle out of, there was a back door to that clinic. And Dr. Rose was a doctor in Story City. He was 100 years old, I think, back then, wasn't he? I mean, he was old. And he would come in the back door by Dr. Hildebrand's office, and he'd come in, and he'd just walk in like he owned the place, you know. And the first time I saw him, I said, oh, that's Dr. Rose. He was my doctor when I was a little kid, you know. So I went up to him and I said, oh, Dr. Rose, you probably don't know who I am, but he says, I do too know who you are. I never thought you'd ever amount to anything. I thought, oh, right. Dr. Hildebrand's hysterical, you know. He's the biggest time. And he just kept right on, Dr. Rose just kept right on walking. And he'd go back to where the surgeons were, and he'd talk to somebody about a problem he had, you know. And he'd come back out and he'd walk right out the back door and not say a word to anybody. I don't know how many times he'd done that when I was working for him, but I didn't ask him any questions after that, no.
Just, good morning, and then away you go.
We had a dermatologist, wasn't the female doctor?
Mhm.
And she
Julia.
had an office
Julia.
on the first, to the right as you came in the front door.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
And I never, I think she left shortly after I started.
Did you throw her out?
No, I didn't. I didn't even interview her.
Was her last name Cole?
Cole,
Yeah.
that's right.
Julia Cole.
Uh-huh.
Well, it was kind of unusual for a female physician
Yeah.
at that time.
Yes, it was.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I don't know, when did our
But
next...
it was some time before we had another
That's why I was... Who
dermatologist.
was that? Well, who was the next female we had in the clinic even?
Well, let's see. Thinking of the new building, we didn't have one for when we
Doctor?
moved.
We had, we had Dr. Clevenger. Did we have anybody before her?
Oh, but that was
That was a long...
a long time ago.
Yeah, but... I mean, it was a long time after we moved
Yeah,
into the new
yeah,
clinic
yeah.
that she came. Yeah, mostly men.
But it sounds as if you were treated with respect. You felt like you were always treated with respect, and that the people with whom you worked were professional. So that was a good working relationship.
Yeah.
It was really truly a family. Like I said, we talked about going down to the basement and having coffee together, and you know, I just never felt like they disliked me any at all. You know, and the doctors weren't any better than the rest of us.
Mhm.
And they were always, Dr. Bliss was always concerned when he had to call me out in the middle of the night. He'd say, I hope I didn't wake up the kids. Or, I knew I just got home tonight and I'm really sorry about this. You know, I mean, he's always concerned about the family. I think most of the rest of them in that age area were very much the same. They had a lot of, they wanted family.
And the families got together too. I mean, when Becky and I worked for Dr. Sproul, they would always be having us come out to their place or something or do something with them. And now even when they come back to town from Colorado, they want to have us go out to eat or do something, you know, just so we can all be together, you know. So
Good. I have been looking at this cap on the table, and I was hoping that Alice would put it on for me.
Hunting shells, the powder and all right there.
Oh, I
Do you
don't
remember that?
No, I
Well,
don't.
Ernie was a big fan of hunting. And for some reason, I can remember him in there doing that.
I do also remember that somebody, I can't remember who it was, a doctor fired his nurse And Ernie walked over and hired her back. Do you remember that?
No.
No, who was that? It was one of the surgical nurses. I can't remember even which doctor fired her. I couldn't
That
tell.
was probably,
Huh?
that was probably uncomfortable.
Anyway, he found out that this, I can't even remember what doctor it was, but had fired her, and Ernie just marched right over to the office. That was in the
She was
clinic.
rehired.
Huh?
She was rehired.
And she was,
Uh,
and he hired her back,
uh-huh.
and she came right back over and went to work. I can't
Now
remember
that
how
you'd
that
think
worked.
that was in my department, you'd think that I would
This
have
used to be
remembered
white.
that.
Oh, gosh, it's been up in the top of the closet for, I don't know.
I know mine's a little yellow
Well,
too.
mine's worse than yours, my gosh.
You want to don them? You want to put them on for
Oh.
me?
Yes, I love my hair. Of
Oh.
course, I didn't wear glasses at this
Yeah,
time.
my
you know.
hair didn't stick up that much before either, so I can't tell if it's on or not.
You know, it's
I have
supposed
to hold them down.
That's fine.
Gosh.
I'm afraid it's gonna fall off.
That looks good. Thank you for doing that. Now your hats are a little bit different, so you have to tell me about that.
Oh, well, every school or whatever had their own hat, so
Did you glue yours up on the refrigerator
oh
door? Jan?
yeah, starch, stiff.
Now, how come both of yours, you're different?
Yeah,
Your
Yeah.
black
every
band
school had their own.
has their own design.
And then you put this on with KY jelly. I don't know how
Yes,
to do
yeah.
yours.
KY. KY
That's
jelly.
really a good glue if you ever need to glue anything.
Now tell me about the starch. What do you mean on a mirror?
Well, you could get this pasty starch that came in a bottle, and you wash your hat, and then you lay it out, and you put this goo all over it, you know, and then you slap it on a smooth surface, you know. So it's always a refrigerator,
So it would dry.
and you had to let it dry for 24 hours because this, and then you peeled it off.
And then you had to try and bend it around.
Yeah, then you had to bend it to fit.
But our uniforms were just about that stiff too. You couldn't hardly sit down.
That was only when we were in nurses training, you know. Yeah,
You know, we wore probably the blue and white stripe. Did you have blue and white
No,
stripe?
we did. We just had the plain white, but if they were very, very stiff, we had to pry them apart to get
Oh.
in.
Ours
Because they,
were the blue and white stripe underneath, and then we wore these white aprons over the top, and they had all these pearl buttons that were on there, and they had a pin that went through, so you had to put every button on, you know, each button by
Individually?
itself.
Oh.
Individually, yeah, and then put this thing all together, and then you couldn't hardly bend over or do anything because it was so stiff.
Yeah, we-
And they did them at the hospital, so I mean, we didn't have anything to do with that, but the hospital made them that stiff.
Oh, that would be something.
yeah, we just had plain white, but like I said, it came back nice and flat, hanging on a hanger, but you had to pry it apart to get in to the dress because it was glued together with
Yeah.
the starch.
That's the way our aprons and stuff, you have to go
And if it, by the end of these 3 years, mine was getting very, very thin. And you had to be careful because when you went to pull it apart, sometimes it's disintegrated right there. So we had to be very careful the last few years. The last year of our training days.
Well, thank you for modeling your hats. I appreciate that, and it's probably all that starch through the years that probably
That made
turned
it
it,
made them so
turned it a
yellow.
little bit
Oh
yellow.
my gosh.
So
That would be bad.
I was going to ask
didn't bring
you.
my pen with me. Did you bring your
Yeah,
pen?
oh yeah.
oh, good.
I brought everything on good time.
Oh, I forgot. And did you bring your little thing that has the diamond in it? Or
Oh,
didn't you
I
get
didn't
one?
get a diamond. That's a sore subject.
Oh.
Don't bring that up. Okay, this was that's my pin from University of Iowa. And then this pin is the University of Iowa pin that you got when you graduated. It says State University of Iowa College of Nursing. It has all those, that's what all those letters are. And this was a honorary society that I was in from down there too. So, and then when Dal was in the Army, I did some work for the American Red Cross, so I have my Red Cross pin. And then these were the different pins that we had, name tags that we had at the clinic. And one year we got these We Care little pins that we were supposed to wear. And then this one is called Reaching for Excellence, another extra pin to wear.
Yeah,